How to prepare for CASPer testing, including examples, step-by-step guide. Hello, BeMo Nation. Welcome to another episode of our One Question podcast. My name is Veronica, and I'm joined today by Meng and Thomas. Say hello.
Hi.
We have nothing to sell you, just pure strategies and tips so everyone has equal access to education. In case you've never watched or listened to any of our podcasts before, they are completely unscripted, no fancy music, no fancy visuals or sound effects, just pure content. Now we have 10 minutes to tackle a topic each week. And this week, as I mentioned, the topic is CASPer strategies, how to prepare for the CASPer test. And we're going to look at some step-by-step examples of how to answer some of the top CASPer questions. Now, before we even get into these examples, Thomas, can you tell us a little bit about this CASPer test? It is a very common assessment tool that is now used not only by medical schools, but also other professions. So what can you tell us about this test?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the CASPer test is somewhat of a relatively new addition to admission processes, but essentially the CASPer is a situational judgment test. So they're trying to see what skills or soft skills a candidate may have, whether that be decision-making or critical thinking. They're essentially just a test of how a candidate handles a certain situation I completely blank. Can we start that over?
Let's start with your response. Start with your response.
Yeah. So the CASPer test is a relatively new addition to admissions process. It's a situational judgment test that assesses a candidate's soft skills, so critical thinking or decision making. And essentially, this is the new format of the CASPer involves both written responses and video-based responses. So that's essentially what the CASPer is for most students.
Okay. And I'll just add to that and just say, you could be you're expecting 15 scenarios in this test. The scenarios themselves, the prompts you get will either be in video format or it'll be in text format. And then with each of the prompts, you get 3 questions, which, like Thomas said, you would be answering in written form, typed, or as a video recorded response.
Okay, great. Thank you for that clarification. Now, that sounds like a lot of questions to get through. So if I'm thinking of a strategy of how to study for this, what is my first step? What should I do to prepare for the CASPer step? Meng, what do you think?
Well, the most important thing that we say for preparation for anything is that you should really engage in realistic prep, right? Perfect practice makes perfect. What we mean by that is you should do simulations that are similar to the test itself, something where you are getting 15 different scenarios, where some of them are video prompts, some of them are written prompts. For each prompt, you are getting 3 questions. Basically, you want to be doing practice tests that simulate the real CASPer experience. That's going to tell you the most information about how you're performing from the get-go, and then where you should be improving. Some people find that they struggle with the time limit they have. You don't have unlimited time to answer all the questions. You have 5 minutes to type out your response to the 3 questions, or if it's a video response type of question, then you have 1 minute to give a response to each of the 3 questions, right? So a lot of people struggle with timing, and that's something you find out when you do a realistic simulation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Now, timing is actually very important. Of course, if you have 5 minutes per question, sometimes 1 minute for the video ones, then once you actually start practicing, then you should think about different strategies for how to manage that time within the 5 minutes. So how do we go about managing to have a coherent answer in 5 minutes or less? What are some of the things we can start with? Thomas?
Yeah, so I think the first thing to start with, and this kind of goes with the preparation, is recognizing different question types and how to address each question type. So we'll expand upon this in just a moment, but essentially with the CASPer, there are different question types that require different strategies, and being able to identify and apply strategies in a coherent and efficient manner is a really important part of your preparation that will ultimately help ensure that you manage your time properly on the actual CASPer.
Okay, great. And can you guys tell me a little bit more about what kind of question types I could expect on a CASPer?
Yeah, I can jump in here. There's really 3 main types. There could be others, but 3 main types we can talk about. Scenario-based ones, these are the biggest ones for CASPer because it is a situational judgment test. This is where you're given a situation, a description of a situation, you're given a role to play, and you're asked general questions about what you would do as this person in the situation. Another one is policy questions, questions that ask you for your opinion or your take on certain issues, real issues, world issues, health issues, whatever it is. And then the last one that that could come up, which you'll see frequently, is personal questions. These are questions that ask you about your own experiences.
Okay, thank you. Perfect. So, okay, so I'm in my test and I've identified the question that I'm being asked. Say it's a scenario-based question. Now, how do I go about answering that question? Is there a strategy for that as well? Thomas, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think having a grasp of that strategy is very important. So for these scenario-based questions, the first thing we recommend is identifying the pressing issue. So what that means is identifying kind of who are the vulnerable parties or who might be involved or who might be implicated by your actions. So that's the first step. Secondly, you want to also gather information to make sure you have an evidence-based decision. So after you've identified who might be most vulnerable, you want to show to the reviewer or the reader or whoever is evaluating your response that you're trying to gather as much information as possible. And this is really important because, again, it shows that you're trying to make an evidence-informed or evidence-based decision. You're not just acting impulsively, you're acting in accordance to the situation. And then after gathering more information, then you want to lay out your actions in what we call kind of an if-then structure. So if I have this piece of information, then I'll do this action. And it's really beneficial to lay out multiple kind of approaches to show that you'll be flexible in the situation and act accordingly. And you almost want to do so or lay out these actions in kind of a best to worst case scenario, because this allows you to show to the reviewer that you will act again in accordance with the situation in your more drastic actions or your more worst case scenarios are not your first option, but rather options that you will have to take if you consider all other more favorable approaches.
Okay, got it. So identify the pressing issue, gather some information, and then come up with some if and then solutions from best to worst, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, what about policy? What kind of strategy do we have in place for policy type questions, Meng?
Yeah, for policy, it's a little different. What you want to do is show your awareness about the issue first off, whatever information you know from reading the news, from staying on top of kind of global events. And then you want to quickly go into talking about the pros and cons, or in other words, the advantages or disadvantages, or just the opinions that have been presented on both sides of the issue. And by doing this first, before you present your stance, what you're really showing the person reviewing your response is that you are taking what Thomas called an information-based approach, right? So evidence-based approach. You're not forming your opinion without first engaging with whatever's out there in terms of different perspectives. Once you've done that, then you can take your stance, talk about whether you're for or against the issue, which side you stand on. At this point, you no longer have to hedge because you've already taken that evidence-based approach. And then you can also talk about what you would propose in terms of either alternatives or modifications to the issue, depending on which side you're on. So if you are against, then obviously proposing an alternative that still brings the pros, still brings the advantages, but doesn't have the disadvantages. If you are against the policy or the issue, then talking about if you're in favor of it, then talking about in what ways you can improve it to get rid of those disadvantages that you also already identified.
Perfect, perfect. So show awareness, give some pros and cons, and then take a stance, and of course, provide alternatives to account for the other side. Wonderful. Now, the third main type question, which is the scenario. Thomas, can you lead us through a strategy for answering one of those?
Yeah, and I just want to clarify, I believe you meant personal. We went over the scenario a little bit earlier. So I'll just jump in and talk about the personal type questions, right? So they can come in many forms on the CASPer, but generally these types of questions are asking about a previous experience of yours. When was the time you dealt with conflict? When was the time you failed? Personal questions are typically formed in that aspect, or in that manner. Now, if you are to get a personal question, the structure we very much recommend in having this, again, strategy is, again, briefly provide a response to the question. So talk about a time you failed, talk about a time you had a conflict. But also you want to highlight the key takeaways from that experience. You want to show what you learned from that experience. So for example, if I failed, I learned how to overcome adversity, right? You want to show to the reviewer that you weren't just, or you don't want to just answer the question. You want to show that you had some sort of tangible lesson that you can then apply moving forward, which is kind of that third step of how will you take the lesson from that personal experience? How will you apply that to your future career to ensure that you'll be successful as you move forward? So that's kind of the general kind of structure for those personal questions of providing an example, talking about a specific takeaway, and then showing that application in a future situation.
Thank you, Thomas. Very detailed answer and a great summary. And that actually brings us to the end of this podcast. We're just at about 10 minutes. So thank you so much for watching this podcast. If you liked it as much as we liked making it for you, please subscribe. Please share it with a friend. And of course, ask any questions if you have them in the comments section. All right. See you later, BeMo Nation.